I've been meaning to do this video for a while. I've struggled with how do I talk about faith as someone who's not necessarily in the role. And I was having a conversation with a friend this afternoon, and I'm like, I'm aware that I put this block on myself, like I'm not that person anymore, and yet I don't know how do I talk about it over here. And it's been a challenge for me. And there are things that I've wanted to say. This just happens to be the week of the Paris Olympics, and there, if you're on social media, which if you're watching this video, you are more than likely, it's always fascinating to watch how people overreact to different situations, and just how much we are reactive people to begin with. That if you're really working on yourself, in touch with yourself, it's much more about responding than it is with reacting. And the very first day, if you've seen it, there was controversy around what appeared to be an image of the Last Supper, which of course is a sacred print done many, 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 many years after Jesus even walked this earth. And it's fascinating as someone who used to be in that world on a daily basis and has still have respect in many ways for a lot of it because of the work that is done. But the overreaction to something like that just blows my mind. How immediately people will revert right back to kind of that animal brain within them and just instinctual. And every time I saw it, as I flipped through my own social media, I just kept thinking to myself, as someone who has studied this stuff, as someone who continues to gain an understanding of what faith even means. For a long time, though, my belief has been that if you believe you have to defend God in some ways, it's probably not God. It is an image of, it is a belief of, it is a thought of what you think God is. God does not need any kind of defense. Just doesn't. It's this God is that big. And so I was just mindful of it over the course of the week, and I still, like, it's a week later, and I still see stuff come up on my feed of this need to defend something, and then I think to myself, like, what are you holding on to? Like, what are you holding on to at that point? Because it goes beyond. And we could debate whether the Olympics intended for anything. None of us knows that. None of us knows the intention of people. And if we think we do, we're simply making a judgment, and we're projecting our own idea onto them. I have no idea, not a clue. But the piece that people often forget, actually not even forget, because they probably have never been taught, that many of these stories have evolved from other stories. That doesn't make it less real, it doesn't make it less true. It actually deepens the truth of any particular story, because there's a mythology behind it. And I think of that when I have seen that image come through the screen. It could be all of these things at the same time. All of them. It could be the Last Supper, it could be some Greek mythology, it could be all of these things at the same time, because there's a pretty good chance that it has evolved from somewhere other than where you think it did. And that's why I think we have to be mindful of thinking we need to defend something when we really don't always know the truth. Just because you are a part of a particular religion, particular faith, does not mean that you know the entirety of the story. You know what you've been told, you know what you know, as it is for all. I am grateful, because the one thing I did on my own was not necessary when I was studying theology, that I also studied mythology at the same time. on my own capacity, to learn that so many of these stories that we are familiar with and have been depicted in art in one way or another don't have their roots where you think they are. I would say the fact that it continues to be interpreted today probably means that there is at least a mythological nature to it at best, but at worst, I should say, at best, that there is some kind of divine nature that works through it. It may be seen, things can be seen as profane, but that doesn't mean that they are. If there is one thing, and you can go and look this up, St. Paul speaks of it himself. We walk by faith, not by sight. Like, just because you see it with your eyes does not mean that it's true, does not mean that it is what it is. That the element of faith is such an important part. And I can't stress that enough. I don't think faith is taught well, because I'm not even sure that it's something in particular that could be taught as much as it's something that you experience. It's something you experience. And it's not often until you find yourself standing on the edge of a cliff, having to make a decision to jump, metaphorically speaking, of course, and not knowing where you're going to land. That's faith. That's faith. And I don't think it's become attached to beliefs, but doesn't mean that it's necessarily faith. And so I've just been mindful of so many of these things over the course of the week, watching how people overreact to so many different things that they are seeing with their eyes without ever fully knowing the story, without ever fully knowing the context of what's really going on, and making a quick judgment. We do it all the time. It is a part of our human nature. Especially when you're meeting someone new, you make an immediate judgment and reaction on that person. That does not mean that you know that person in its entirety. We know that as well, and it doesn't stop us. But in this element of faith, God does not need to be defended. And if you feel you need to defend God in one way or another, it's not God. It just isn't. It's plain and simple. Because no words, no human words, are ever going to suffice to give a description of, an identity towards this God that we say we believe in, and more importantly, that we have faith in. Because that God is always going to invite you into the unknown, is going to invite you to the place of curiosity to say, what's really going on here? And you're not going to listen to pundits, and you're not going to listen to memes, and you're not going to do all these other things. You're going to be curious about it yourself. And in that curiosity is where we really begin to discover who this God really is, beyond the words, beyond the descriptions, beyond who you think it is. I still believe, as someone who has been there over and over and over again, that you will find who God is when you allow yourself to walk to the edge of the cliff, jump, and not know where you are going to land. It just is. That's faith. That is faith. And that's the risk. For lack of better terms, that's the risk that comes by calling yourself a person of faith, that you don't always know. Because as soon as we attach it to known and certainty, God loses God's nature in that way. So there's still another week to the Olympics, so I'm sure there'll be more controversies and more issues that arise over the course of the week. And so I'll be looking for those opportunities of curiosity myself, by simply asking, what's really going on here? And We don't just have to do it about the Olympics. We could do it about our own lives. Like, what's really going on? What's really going on? And can we be curious enough to know that we don't always know? And in those moments, that's where you'll understand what faith really is.